Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa Maulana wa Habibina wa Shafiina wa Tabibi Qulubina Muhammadin wa alihi wa azwajihi wa zurriyatihi wa atba'ihi wa warasatihi ajma'in. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ahu wa arina al-batila batila warzuqna ijtinabah. Continuing our reading of Allama Iqbal's Rahmatullah alayhi's reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, and we had covered this point last time. So we had covered this point. But I want to go back to this word, immediacy or non-mediated character of experience he's talking about. So the first point to note is the immediacy of this experience, that is religious experience or mystical experience according to Allama Iqbal. The first point to note is the immediacy of this experience in this respect doesn't differ from other levels of human experience which supply data for knowledge or data for knowledge. All experience is immediate and we took a bit of issue with this one the last time, as regions of normal experience are subject to interpretation. Also normal and abnormal, obviously that's all relative. As regions of normal experience are subject to interpretation of sense data for our knowledge, are subject of interpretation of sense data for our knowledge of the external world, so the region of mystic experience is subject to interpretation of our knowledge of God. So both involve interpretation. So I guess what is immediate is the data, not the knowledge itself, because once you require interpretation, then it is not immediate. It is mediated through your interpretation, I guess. All experience is immediate, as regions of normal experience are subject to interpretation of sense data for a knowledge of the external world. So the regions of mystic experience is subject to interpretation for our knowledge of God. The immediacy of mystic experience, the second time using this word in this paragraph, the immediacy of mystic simply means, what does it mean? That we know God just as we know other objects. So in that sense, he is not necessarily meaning immediacy in the sense of non-conceptual knowledge necessarily. God is not that's a negative point which is important. God is not a mathematical or system of concepts mutually related to one another. So the abstract concept of God which philosophers have and which has influenced certain interpretations of mutakallimin as well. God is not, he's rejecting that, at least here. God is not a mathematical entity or system of concept mutually related to one another and having no reference to experience. So the most important word in there are two important words in this paragraph. The words, first is experience, and the other is immediacy. And one way to read it, the way we read it last time, immediacy mean that it is not mediated through concepts. So concepts obviously get involved, but at a later stage. That's one way of reading it. The immediacy, because in philosophical tradition, I mean, at least there are two traditions. Which one is that you experience, obviously there are more than two, but so the British empiricist tradition and the analytical philosophy which ensues in its wake, not all analytical philosophy, but a lot of it which follows British empiricism, claims that our experience of object is immediate in the sense that the content of experience comes, which some of them call sense data, and nowadays I think more often use the word content. I mean, it has been a while I have read this sort of stuff, but content. So by immediacy of the experience, such tradition might mean that content or sense data come to us as raw material, and then in the second we provide concepts. On the other hand, the other tradition, which is also in analytic philosophy as well, I'm more impressed by Hegelian, for example, McDowell and those people. I think they call conceptualism or something like that. They said that there's no such this sense data content prior to conceptualization is just an abstraction. And sense data or content comes to us always already conceptualized. And Kant, for example, can be read in this way as well. But I think with Kant, both traditions try to quote Kant for that. So I don't know why I mention all this, but let's go back to what we were talking about. Yeah, so this, I mean, in this, I think I read last time I read Iqbal's talk of immediacy in this context. So that's one natural way of reading it, but I think there are other ways as well. So today we are going to look at some other ways. And one thing which jumped at me when I was rereading it, I'll go back to that line and then see whether it's something new or... Here he said the immediacy, let me mark it so you can look at what I'm reading. So the immediacy here, the immediacy of mystic simply means that we know God just as we know other objects. So let's look at this a bit in more detail. So that then I actually, yeah, that won't make much difference. It will depend on if you are a conceptualist about the experience of objects, you would say. So immediacy for him, I think here doesn't necessarily mean conceptualism, or I think you don't have to take a position on those philosophical issues. In order to accept this concept of immediacies. So he simply the immediacy of the mystic experience simply means that we know God just as we know other objects, even though obviously a way of knowing and the sources of knowing and those two objects are different. But for sure, immediacy here doesn't necessarily mean non-conceptual. Yeah. Okay. I think we have. I have to go right now, but I think later today, probably not. In a couple of in a half an hour, I think I'll continue this in another session, inshallah.